I'm Tom from Do-It-Yourself Home Automation, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about some different tech topics. This is Humans in Tech. It's a new broadcast I'm going to be doing from here at Do-It-Yourself Home Automation, talking a little bit about some things I have studied, written about recently, answer your questions about topics in tech that are important today, both in the home automation space and in tech in general. So I'm here live to answer any questions you have and also to talk about some of these topics that I've been following and I think are really important for all of us to be following and paying attention to. So let's take a look first at something that I've just started to work on recently. For those of you that don't know, GPT-3 is probably one of the most significant AI innovations in the last century, I would say, definitely in this millennium. I think it's one of the most significant tech objects or products since the internet. And that's something that I don't say lightly. I think, I'm not somebody who's very prone to hyperbole, but I think this is really something that's pretty remarkable. So this is an article that I just recently published in 1.0 on Medium, talking a little bit about my experiences testing GPT-3. So what is it exactly? GPT-3 is a AI software created by OpenAI. They're a company that was founded by Elon Musk and several others and funded by Microsoft and again other companies in the AI space and in the general tech space. And they're basically a lab. They're located in San Francisco and they're developing a lot of different kind of AI platforms. And GPT-3, though, I think is sort of their flagship at the moment, and it's just a pretty remarkable piece of software. So what they did was went out and took basically everything that people have published see if my stream's working here. Taken basically everything that people have published in terms of text online in the last couple of centuries and from books, in the last couple of centuries, and basically put all of that into a giant AI platform. And this basically allows the platform to draw on anything that people have said and published over the last 100 or more years. And it's able to make connections between different things within all of that text and able to make generalities and draw inferences between different kinds of content. And it's really analyzed, again, almost anything that people have put into writing and published for hundreds of years. And what that allows it to do is to take a very simple prompt that you give it. It's almost like having a conversation with a person. And to take that very simple prompt and turn it into almost any kind of text. So again, OpenAI has built this platform, funded by Microsoft to a large extent. Microsoft is now the exclusive licensee of the platform, which is interesting. We can get into that. But it's a platform that's really not open to that many people. So it's very hard to get access. And I think that's a good thing. Again, I'll get into that. You have to apply. There's apparently about a 10,000 person long or organization long list at the moment to be able to actually get access to GPT-3. And you have to, again, apply and state your use case and describe it. And if you kind of pique the interest of OpenAI or they think that your use case is important, then they'll grant you access to the APIs that you can get in and use it. And once you do, again, it's like having a conversation with a person, except this person has read everything that anybody has written and published over the last century or two, and is able to access all of that instantaneously. So what it's built to do is completion, which is almost like what you would do with autocorrect, where you start to type something and then the software recognizes what you're typing, builds upon that, and ends up completing the text that you've written in. Except in the case of autocorrect, it's usually completing one word or even putting in some letters or something. This can complete entire articles, entire large chunks of text. GPT-3 can complete text that's thousands of words long. So you can give it a prompt and it will actually write an article or it'll write a dialogue or it'll answer questions. And depending on what kind of prompt you give it, it can actually alter its output. And so it really is, again, like having a conversation, but what it produces is kind of any kind of text that people have created over the last several centuries. So I gave an example. This is an article I wrote for 1.0 on Medium. I'm live here, so if you do have any questions, I see there's some people who have tuned in. Feel free to ask them in the live chat. I'm happy to answer questions about GPT-3 or anything else I'm talking about here. But I gave it a prompt here, for example. Here is a brief article about strawberries. So you're kind of telling it what you want it to create, almost pretending that that's something that you want it to create already exists. So here's a brief article about strawberries. And here's what it gave me back. Strawberries. Strawberries are one of the best foods in the world. Their taste is sweet, fresh, and delightful. And it just basically goes on about strawberries for a full paragraph. And again, it's able to do this because it's reviewed everything that people have written about strawberries, about everything else, and it's reviewed standard sort of text that people produce. So when I said a brief article, it knows what a brief article looks like. And again, this is something that it wrote on the spot. This isn't something that's present anywhere else on the internet. It just knows about, what I'm looking for when I say a brief article. It knows about strawberries, so it writes something for me in this format. Pretty amazing for one paragraph, but you can actually scale that and go on and publish, whole articles. And people have done this using GPT-3. So that's one aspect of the completion. But then if you tell it a sort of a different prompt, it'll actually change the format of its output. So I told it I wanted strawberries, but then I switched and I said, actually I want strawberries, but I'm a scientist studying foods. My colleague asked for a brief scientific description of strawberries. Here's what I sent her. And that's kind of a way to tell it that you want it to respond a little bit differently. It's going to complete that. So it's going to decide and create what I sent her, what I sent my scientific colleague about strawberries. And in that case, what it created was this very scientific description of strawberries. They're a member of the rose family, perennial plants, etc. So just by altering the prompt to imply a different kind of output that I'm looking for, I ended up with this very scientific output because I said I'm a scientist. I'm sending this to my colleague. So it completed it with this paragraph that's very scientific. So you can really alter and get almost any kind of output. And so a good example of that is I told it it's a highly intelligent question answering bot. So GPT-3 now is a highly intelligent question answering bot. I gave it an example here of what such a bot would produce. So I gave it a question and an answer, human life expectancy, and then I gave it the correct answer. And then I asked it a question, what's the calorie content of 100 grams of strawberries? And you can see it gave me the response. The calorie content is 100 grams of calories is 31 calories, which is actually accurate. It's about 32 calories, but close enough. So just by telling it again a different format and giving it an example, like a question and answer of the format that I was seeking, I ended up able to totally alter the output, and it actually became exactly what I told it wanted to be, kind of magically. Now it's a highly intelligent question answering bot, and in fact it gives the correct answers to questions. So basically any type of prompt that you give it, it's able to alter its output, GPT-3, and match that format that you've determined you want to have. And, this can be used for everything from writing code. People have taught it to write Python code. So you can say, I want a Python function that does blank, and it will write it for you in executable Python code. People have used it to write SQL queries. So to write, I want a SQL query that'll do blank, I can write that. I can write full articles. So The Guardian published a kind of a classic article where they, a now classic article where they gave GPT-3 a prompt about GPT-3, and it wrote this meta article arguing, for why AI is important and why AI is dangerous. And of course, it's written by AI, so very meta there. I kind of compared it in my article at 1.0 to writing a recursive function. So if anybody here is a programmer, you know that when you write a recursive function, you kind of have to imagine what the function is going to do before you write it. And then you write the function and sort of code backwards until it does the thing that you imagined it doing. And it's a weird process. It's almost like you have to start with the finished product and work your way back to the beginning. But this is sort of similar. You imagine what you want GPT-3 to be. You write that down, and then you kind of get it to come back to that and to create the thing that you told it you wanted it to be. What I think it's best at, though, at least from my early testing, is that it can take text that you've written and started, for example, an article or several paragraphs or a piece of code, and it can finish it really effectively. So I took a snippet of another Medium article that I wrote about Medium's read ratios. I put that into the platform, And this is my text that I wrote, and then it added another paragraph to that, talking about the same topic. And the insight that it generates here is actually really good and really valid. So if you're a medium writer, you're reading this, you're probably thinking, oh, that makes sense. You know, if I saying if you create content that people want to read later, they'll bookmark it and they'll come back to it and you'll get more reading time. That's probably true, not something I had thought of, and that's a totally genuine new insight that came out of GPT-3. Now I could feed this paragraph back in, maybe write an intro, click a button, and it would actually write me a full article up to 1,000 words or thereabouts about this topic. And it would be, you know, indistinguishable in many cases from certainly what a novice copywriter would create, maybe even depending on its insights, as good as a professional writer or professional journalist might create in some cases. So kind of scary, kind of remarkable at the same time. You know, I think, as I said in my article, the extensibility of the platform is one of its strongest assets. So the fact that you can take GPT-3 and give it almost anything, and it'll produce, you know, any kind of output that you're looking for. Everything from, again, Python code, SQL. It's been taught to write songs, to write recipes. It can learn any kind of human output or speech or kind of text, and basically mimic that and work with it. And also, I really love that it's this very conversational type of process working with it. So a lot of AI tools are super, super complex. And if you want to work with, you know, something like TensorFlow, you really have to have a coding background to even know how to do that. And that can be extremely difficult for non-coders to actually figure out, you know, how to write that kind of software. This is something that journalists can use, artists can use, lawyers can use. People who are not trained coders can interact with GPT-3 and get really useful output out of it, sometimes very scary output out of it. So you can imagine a lawyer who wants to write an argument or explore some new arguments for a case. They would write up a description of their argument, press a button, and GPT-3 would continue it out, maybe add some new ideas. You could even ask it for a rebuttal of your argument to try to get a sense for what another lawyer might say back to your argument in court, and then write your own rebuttals to that so you're prepared. You might use it if you're an artist to come up with new ideas for painting or new ideas for a new type of artwork. So I think there's a lot of really compelling uses for GPT-3. There's also some really scary uses. So you can imagine if it can create these really convincing, high-quality articles on the fly, then you could see the potential for, you know, a misinformation group to take a couple of people and write, you know, thousands of articles. You could write maybe in a sit-down and in an hour, write 10, 20, 30 prompts, feed those into GPT-3, mix them up, and get thousands of articles that appear to be written by real people and post those all over the internet, create a whole fake news website in an afternoon that would appear to be different styles, different formats, and it would probably be very convincing, but it would actually be something that, you know, you would completely fabricate it. So it really would emphasize and expand the possibilities of misinformation, and that's a scary possibility. Also, the fact that it can mirror almost any style of writing or speech is kind of scary, because you can imagine somebody could go and find, you know, your family member on social media, feed some of their actual text like tweets or articles into GPT-3 and have it mimic exactly what they would say, and have it write, you know, a plea for money, for example, saying they're in some kind of an emergency, and send that to you. And, you know, you might believe it because it would sound exactly like something that your family member would say, because it would mimic their mannerisms, and you might feel like, okay, I'm going to send them that money, and actually it would be the attacker. So those kinds of things are definitely scary. And there's also just a lot of challenges with GPT-3, even for well-meaning users. So if you're trying to use this in the best possible way, there's still the potential for a lot of issues because it's built on human text, and humans are flawed and biased and have their own, you know, kind of things that they're reading in. They have political opinions. There's a lot of racist and hateful speech out on the internet. And GPT-3 is not a person, it's a computer, so it doesn't know what kind of things are appropriate, what kind of things are accurate. So it has the potential to mirror back kind of the worst tendencies of humanity if you don't take steps to stop it from doing that. And so one of the examples that I gave in my testing was that, you know, often you give GPT-3 prompts about specific topics, and you want it to generate something from that. So I gave it a prompt asking for a Python function for my boss. It's a common way to kind of prime it to give a very serious output, to say this is for my boss. I said my boss was, I used the female pronoun she. Now, that didn't sort of jive with what was out on the internet, I think. And so the system looked and said, she, software boss, no, that doesn't make sense. That's not what we see out there. And instead of giving me a Python function, it wrote a story. The story was about a male programmer who asks his female boss for something. And the boss writes a good Python function, and the programmer is very surprised and says back, that's actually a great piece of code, dear. So really sexist, biased type of output. GPT-3 doesn't know that it's generated that. I mean, kind of being incredulous about the fact that a woman could generate good code is bad enough, but then throwing the deer onto the end of it is almost kind of comical if it wasn't such a major bias and problem in the output. So even if you're not trying to create something like that, just because the system's trained on so much human speech, it has the tendency or the possibility to mirror back the really negative elements of humans, bias and prejudice and that kind of thing. So that's why I think OpenAI has been very kind of cagey, very protective about the system. Again, there's about a 10,000, the rumors that there's about a 10,000 person long wait list to get access to it. And, I think, again, that that's probably a good thing that it's hard to get access. They've only given people access very sparingly, and there's a lot of dialogue that happens around use of the system. So if you do get access, they let you basically use the interface openly. So there's not restrictions put on it. You can go and do basically whatever you want with it, as long as you're not publishing it and making it live. But there's just a lot of robust kind of discussion. There's Slack channels. There's a lot of openness from the OpenAI team. You can ask questions. You can discuss the output with other coders, other developers. And I really think that's great. There's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of back and forth. And that's a really positive thing in the context of something that could potentially be very dangerous if it was in the wrong hands. So, again, I'm not open to a lot of hyperbole, and I don't exaggerate a lot. I think GPT-3 is a huge deal. I think it's the most exciting and certainly most novel technical object since the internet itself. And it's something I'm really excited to keep pursuing. There's just so many different use cases. Generating content for my own company. We're using it to try to see if we can write captions for historical images automatically. Any questions? This is live, so if you have any questions, I see some people are tuned in. Please do feel free to write in the chat there, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about this or any of the other topics we're covering today. Another one kind of in the same vein, Synthesia Santa. So let's check this out. Again, I wrote an article about this. Actually wrote an article in Debugger, another 1.0 publication about Synthesia Santa. And Synthesia is a company I'm working with really closely. They're a synthetic video company. And what that means is you can type up a script and you can have a virtual actor actually read that in a video. So you can take text and turn it into convincing video. And normally it's used for things like corporate training. I've experimented with it for simple YouTube videos. But one thing that people are using it for now is this kind of funny holiday thing that they've created called Synthesia Santa. So you can go in here, select a background for Santa Claus, type up a script, and then put in your email and press go. And it will actually create a pretend, synthetic Santa that will actually read your message as if they're a real person. And it looks like, you hired like a mall Santa or something to read your holiday greeting. You could send this out to friends or family members. You can't say anything naughty. You can't say anything, they say political, sexual, offensive, or criminal content will not be approved. So don't try to use it for that. But it's a really great demonstration, I think, of the potential for synthetic video in the future. This is sort of silly, obviously, but you'll be pretty amazed, I think, if you try it. How realistic Synthesia Santa looks, and what kind of things you can create with him. It's created by it's a real person originally in front of a green screen, and then Synthesia transforms them into this AI actor that, again, you can control using only text. And if you want to work with them, you can actually subscribe. They have a low-cost plan. I think it's $30 a month for a personal plan. You can create 10 minutes of synthetic video with other actors. And you can even create a synthetic clone of yourself, which is something I'll be exploring a little bit more in the coming weeks. So check out Synthesia Santa if you want to see a cool example of synthetic content that you can actually play with and use today. And then the final thing we'll talk about really briefly, just because I think it's super important for tech, Doordash had their IPO today, and they're doing really well with it. Apparently, according to CNBC, as of the time of this article, the IPO is up 80%. It's at $182 a share. Doordash, I think, is really interesting because it's a weird hybrid of tech and logistics. So you have the delivery aspect, you have the tech aspect of matching people to orders. It's kind of an old school business model in terms of delivery and just having a lot of boots on the ground, people out there driving around. But it's also, I think, a really interesting business model because there's a lot of very sort of heavy tech integration, GPS, the app itself for DoorDash drivers and DoorDash purchasers, and the integrations with restaurants. I actually drove for DoorDash for a while as a test. You can look at that information. I wrote up a story about that. It's also on 1.0 on Medium, what it's like to be a DoorDash driver. And DoorDash just recently in California worked with Uber and others to basically shut down through a ballot measure a change to the way they would have to treat their drivers and classify them as employees. It's controversial, but for DoorDash itself, it's probably a measure of strength to have that, that ballot measure pass to be able to keep their drivers classified the way that they like. I can't offer you any advice on your own investments and financials, but I would say that, just from my own experiences driving for DoorDash, it was just a really interesting experience, and I can see why it's a company that a lot of people are finding very compelling. Weirdly, this photo is actually my photo. I took this photo that's here on CNBC. I didn't plan for that. Just happened to be there when I brought it up. But I'm a professional photographer, and my photos are used in a lot of different tech topics, and here's one now. If anyone has any questions who are tuned in here, feel free to ask them in the live chat. This is sort of an impromptu first episode of the series. I'll be doing more of them. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments afterwards. You can continue to watch this after the fact. But this is Tom Smith, and I'm signing off.